Beyond just Marshall Plan funds, the Warburgs also benefited from their deep connection to international banking and financial institutions. James Warburg had direct input into the creation of the Bretton Woods system, which stabilized global finance and created the IMF and World Bank. Warburg-associated banks handled large loans of IMF and World Bank loan distributions, profiting from transaction fees and financial agreements too. In London, the S.G. Warburg Bank, founded by Sigmund Warburg, became one of Europe's most influential investment banks, helping British and European businesses restructure and modernize. S.G. Warburg and Company became known for pioneering Eurobond markets, which allowed European firms to raise capital internationally, a highly profitable innovation. Warburg Pincus, the family's U.S.-based private equity firm, grew significantly in the decades after World War II, using its capital and connections to fund businesses benefiting from the post-war recovery. By the 1960s and 1970s, Warburg Pincus was a leading venture capital firm investing in technology, manufacturing, and financial services companies that arose during the European economic boom. How much did the Warburgs gain? While exact profit figures are unknown, we can estimate based on the Warburgs' banking activities and their post-war financial empire. S.G. Warburg and Company grew into a multi-billion-dollar investment bank before merging with UBS in the 1990s. Warburg Pincus, as of today, manages over $8 billion in assets, and much of this wealth was accumulated during the post-war period. The firm made highly profitable investments in European industries, securing returns in the hundreds of millions, if not billions, over the decades. By leveraging post-war recovery and U.S. economic dominance, Warburg Pincus became one of the largest and most influential private equity firms in the world. The Warburg family, already wealthy before World War II, saw a significant increase in their wealth after the war as their investments expanded in both Europe and the U.S. By the 1970s, various Warburg-associated financial firms controlled billions of assets across multiple industries. While the Warburgs may not have directly profited from the Marshall Plan in a conventional sense, their role in rebuilding the European financial system, advising governments, and facilitating private investments positioned them as major financial beneficiaries of post-war reconstruction. Their influence ensured that capital flowed through Warburg-associated institutions, allowing them to expand their banking empire, grow private equity investments, and strengthen international financial networks. This strategic positioning likely led to profits in the hundreds of millions, if not billions, over time. Lyndon B. Johnson's comments about the potential international tensions and the risks of war following the assassination of President JFK stem from several geopolitical and diplomatic factors that were at play during the early 1960s. The assassination of a sitting U.S. president was an extraordinary event, and Johnson, as Kennedy's vice president, found himself thrust into the presidency under a cloud of uncertainty. The comments were likely intended to reassure both domestic and international audiences about the stability of the U.S. government and to emphasize the gravity of the situation. Here are some key factors why Johnson might have spoken of such concerns. By the time of Kennedy's assassination, the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union was already in a very tense phase. The U.S. and the USSR were engaged in multiple proxy conflicts across the globe, including the Cuban Missile Crisis just a year earlier in 1962, which had brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. Kennedy had been widely credited with handling the crisis in a way that avoided direct military confrontation and nuclear escalation. Kennedy's death raised the possibility of an unstable political tension, especially considering that his successor, Lyndon B. Johnson, had less experience in foreign affairs compared to Kennedy. Johnson himself was deeply concerned that the Soviets might perceive his administration as weaker or less competent, and he feared that any signs of weakness could provoke more aggressive behavior from the Soviet Union or their allies in Eastern Europe and Asia. This would have been a significant concern given the volatile state of global politics at the time. At the time of Kennedy's assassination, Cuba remained a critical issue in the U.S. foreign policy. The Cuban Missile Crisis had demonstrated the global stakes involved in any move related to the Cuban government, which was under the leadership of Fidel Castro, a communist ally of the Soviet Union. The United States had been actively involved in efforts to undermine Castro's regime, supporting anti-Castro Cuban exiles and attempting covert actions, including the failed Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961. With Kennedy's assassination, there was uncertainty regarding the U.S. stance towards Cuba and the broader Latin American region. Johnson may have feared that any misstep could lead to escalation in the Soviet Union or Cuba, particularly since there had been significant tensions over U.S. military presence in the Caribbean and nearby waters. Additionally, Kennedy had been very vocal about his commitment to the Alliance for Progress, a program aimed at improving U.S.-Latin American relations. The association raised questions about the continuity of these diplomatic efforts and the potential for instability in the Western Hemisphere. By 1963, the Vietnam War was already an issue that Kennedy had been addressing, though he had not yet committed large-scale U.S. military forces to the conflict. Kennedy had expressed a desire to limit American involvement in Vietnam, especially in terms of direct military combat. He had also spoken about the need for a negotiated settlement to the conflict, although his precise intentions remain a subject of debate. After Kennedy's assassination, Johnson assumed the presidency at a time when U.S. involvement in Vietnam was increasingly under scrutiny. Johnson's remarks about the risk of war likely reflected the concern that instability in Vietnam along with fears of a Soviet or Chinese-backed expansion of communism, could spiral into broader regional conflict in Southeast Asia. Johnson would ultimately escalate the U.S. military presence in Vietnam. No, Johnson, who would ultimately escalate the U.S. military presence in Vietnam, may have been indicating that the geopolitical risk of the Kennedy assassination could lead to a further escalation of the conflict. Now, personally, when it comes to Johnson, I don't feel that he was worried about the escalation or the conflict escalating. I personally feel that he wanted it to, these negotiations that Kennedy was supposed to be wanting. In my opinion, uh, they those negotiations just disappeared. It's just like what I was talking about with what Kennedy was having to do in Southeast Asia concerning the testing of nuclear weapons. Okay, he was really active in that uh, those negotiations, but after his assassination, Johnson seemed to just let it linger. It didn't become priority like it was before, and that seemed to be the common theme with all the presidents afterwards. It took until I think 20, maybe 30 decades before they actually made Southeast Asia a nuclear free zone, and that's my take on it. It's just like with Vietnam. I believe that there were groups here in the United States that wanted it to escalate more. It was, in my opinion, it seemed like it was more of a military experiment to see how well they could stand up against the communists. That's just my take on it. So, with that being said, I will shut up now and I will continue. The assassination of Kennedy not only shocked the United States, but also had a profound impact on foreign leaders and governments around the world. Allied countries feared that a change in U.S. leadership might affect the stability of alliances, particularly NATO. Meanwhile, adversaries such as the Soviet Union, Cuba, and China might have seen an opportunity to exploit the uncertainty surrounding U.S. leadership. Kennedy had cultivated a reputation for being a strong, charismatic leader on the world stage. His assassination raised concerns among foreign leaders about the future direction of U.S. foreign policy. Johnson's remark about the risk of war could have been directed at us assuaging assuaging global concerns